Hello, innovators. I am Dustin Miller PolyInnovator. Today we're talking with Chris Ippolito, the host of the Get Coach podcast and entrepreneur. Thank you for joining us on the Polymath POLYCASTS, a show about becoming a polyinnovator. Please say hello to the innovators in the audience.
Hey, innovators. Hey, peeps.
Perfect. Hello and welcome to the Polymath POLYCAST. Share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
Very few people would know unless they've been a close friend of mine or have happened to stumble across a YouTube channel that I've done for 9 years. It's currently at about 8,800 subscribers, just over 2 million views. And all we do now, it evolved into this, but all we do now, or I should say, I don't really do it anymore, but we play board games. That's it. And it's obviously a very small niche.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've grown a bit of a following. I learned a lot about podcasting, YouTube, all that sort of thing through the YouTube channel. But yeah, most people do not know that about me.
I'm actually really mad because I try to do like a deep research for whatever guest I have on the show, and the fact that I didn't find that makes me kind of mad at myself. So something I really resonate about you that I did find is that you have always had that entrepreneurial spirit for a long time, ever since you were a kid. I think the story was that when you were 13, you were selling candies and sodas to other kids in school.
Yeah, I was in junior high. They started a new class, an optional class called Enterprise and Innovation. And I was drawn to it right away because, again, even at that age, I was just like, oh, I want to own a business. I want to make a bunch of money. Of course, at that age, that's all you're really thinking about. And I decided to go with a concession stand in the school because there wasn't really anything like that. And I leveraged my parents' Costco membership, was able to go buy cans of pop at a cost of, it was like 25 cents a can. And normally, even back then, vending machines, it was like $1.
Yeah.
So I was like, you know what? I'm going to be the discount guy. So I sold them at 50 cents and still made a killing. And I bought like the little 5-cent candies and chocolate bars and stuff like that. So I was, in a sense, and you could consider me a bit of a drug dealer in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, I was hawking the sugar at junior high.
But I mean, that's pretty cool. And it reminds me of like my own foray into it as well. I wanted money, like you said, and I was around like 10 or 11, and my uncle handed me like this book of businesses you could start as a teenager, basically. And one of the things was like a lemonade stand. I was like, oh, that's cool, but I don't really want to have to set up a stand like that because I was at home. I wasn't at a school for it. And so I got these temporary tattoos, and I'd get like a pack of 25 and chop them all up, sell them for 10 cents, quarter, whatever, however the big they were. And then I would apply them to people, get a little spray bottle, peel them off properly and that kind of thing. And like you said, made a killing because like you could sell them for a decent penny and they only cost $1 for that 25 pack. So it was crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
Early stage.
You know what's funny is that there was actually like a little marker tattoo thing that it vibrated like an actual tattoo pen that I had. And it's like a temporary tattoo pen. It was crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Give them the full experience for a quarter.
Yeah. I never actually told anybody that part. That was cool.
Nice.
So something that I saw on your profile actually that was very eye-catching is that when your son was born, he helped you find your why. What is it and why did that change?
That is a really good question. So for me, I feel like it's him, but in a more broad sense, it's just that now all of a sudden I had a family and my why became providing for that family. So prior to that, my now wife, at the time we were engaged, but it wasn't that relationship wasn't important. And I still was, playing around with entrepreneurial ventures here and there, but just adding somebody who is 100% dependent on you as a father, that really just shifted things. And it just made me want to be, a better person in general so that I could be able to provide for both of them and just be the kind of person that I want my son to grow up to be.
Yeah. That drive for accountability.
Yeah. So a lot of people, I I feel that's where faith and religion comes in for them, is there's always somebody that you're accountable to.
Mhm.
I'm not a religious person, so I've never had that.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say never. I grew up in a Catholic system, but I always challenged those ideas and never grabbed on to any of it. But now it's kind of, for me, it's, my son, that's his future is what I'm accountable to,
Yeah.
which is kind of funny because you would think you'd want to be accountable to your own future self, which I am, but it's because I know I need to be around and provide for his future. So I don't know. That's
No,
just what it is for me.
yeah, definitely. You found that accountability source, so to speak. I it's not nearly the same level as like a parent kind of thing, but when I started having guests on this show, I was having a hard time staying as consistent with the content creation just because whether other factors were preventing me from doing it. But when there was a guest that was relying on me to get that out, it caused me to actually start like, hey, I'll stay up late and finish this editing if I have to, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I get the whole accountability thing. And even then, for PolyInnovator, the reason why I do it is so I can help the world make a change down the line.
Yeah. And putting yourself out there and saying that enough times,
Mm-hmm.
the more people that hear it, the more it just becomes ingrained in your mind. Like, I've committed this to a large number of people. It was kind of the same thing when I started the Get Coach podcast. I had the idea. I figured out a process to get guests on the show relatively quickly, which was kind of nice.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden I was like, I just didn't give myself time to think it through like I used to, which was one of my biggest obstacles growing up whenever I wanted to try some sort of entrepreneurial venture.
Mm-hmm.
Is I would overthink it and I would overplan it. And then you get to a point where you're like, oh, well, I haven't really started, so why bother now? But with the Get Coached podcast, what I did was I just started booking. I started throwing out my Calendly link to potential guests, and then they would book. And I was like, well, I have to show up to this 15-minute pre-interview call now. And then I would extend an invite, and then they would book the 60-minute. And I was like, well, I have to show up to that too, because they booked. And I put a standard as far as, if you book it with me, you're following up, because treat this like a business meeting in a sense. I'm not actually as rigid as that. There's been circumstances where I had to cancel last minute due to illness.
Mm-hmm.
Same with guests, but I set that standard up front, that once you book this, like, this is to me, it's a serious commitment. Yeah. And I hope you treat it that way too.
Definitely. And it's interesting. I've experienced with, as a guest and as a host, the difference between doing an introduction call and just kind of reaching out. I felt like I should start doing those introduction calls because I saw you do it, and someone else I was talking to has done it as well. And I also kind of like the idea of just jumping right into it and that kind of thing. So I wondered about the duality of that. But it's also interesting that you set that commitment forthright. When I started my Polycast, it didn't start out as a Polycast either. I did a few different iterations since then. But I just did solo episodes, so it was just on my own. And then I realized that, like, I don't know if it's the method you talked about getting people fast was Matchmaker, but when I started using Matchmaker.fm, no, okay.
No, I'll share if you want.
Yeah. Well, quick, I'll just wrap this up. But when I started getting guests and whatnot, I was like, okay, I'm going to make sure I do deep research into this person to make sure I get some awesome questions, something they've never seen before, or at least try to the best of my ability. What is that method so I can copy?
First, I just want to say, I like your approach. I appreciate the effort that you went into, because there were certain questions I'm like, oh, like, you did your homework because you're pulling it from my online presence of some sort, right? So the system that I developed was, I actually modeled it after a lead generation course that's sold for LinkedIn. So generating business and lead opportunities through LinkedIn. And I subscribed to this business's newsletter, went through a couple of their webinars to try and learn a little bit more about them, and was considering going through the program for sales. I was actually in a business development role, B2B, and I thought, hey, this could be a unique way of getting qualified leads through LinkedIn and whatnot. Then eventually I decided, I was like, you know what, I want to do the podcast. I was like, I wonder if I could use this similar methodology to go and find podcast guests. And so there's a little bit of automation, which I know is against the terms of services with LinkedIn. So I don't really do this anymore, but this was kind of how I launched the podcast. Was I used an automation tool that just would send automatic invites to people that were on my list. So the list I was building was business coaches. So it does like a scrape of LinkedIn. Anybody who's got the title business coach, it would put them on a list. I'd clean it up a little bit because there was some people that they were like business coach assistants or something like that. That actually wasn't their role. And then I would write a pretty basic kind of interruption message, just saying, hey, like, love what you're doing as a business coach. Would love to expand my connections and reach out and just see if there's a good fit for us to work together. Mm-hmm. And something like that. I can't even remember what I wrote, but it was something where I wasn't really selling anything on the initial message. So started that process. Through a couple of iterations, I was like, well, that went well. My exception rate on that for connection requests was like 50 to 60%, which was pretty decent for an automated system. Compared to like any other form of opt-in digital marketing. So I was like, well, you know what? Why don't I just straight up in the first message say, I'm launching a podcast. I'm looking for guests just like you. Would you be interested in being a guest? If so, accept the request. If not, no worries, no big deal. Exception rate of my connection request went up to like 75%. So then I did a follow-up sequence of one automated message, which was kind of saying like, hey, thanks for accepting. I'll reach out soon. I'm going through this process with a lot of other people. I'll reach out soon so that we can kind of explore things a little bit more. And then from that point on, I did it manually and just started chatting with them, letting them know what I was doing while I was building the website, while I was getting a lot of questions from them. I was building an FAQ list of the common questions I was getting so that when they did have questions, I would actually just link them to FAQ and say, hey, I know you've got questions. Mm-hmm. Check out this document. It's already been asked and my answers are there. So that shortened up the process quite a bit. That evolved into a video, which I recorded a 5-minute video, which you might have seen the second version of it.
I think that one was longer.
Yeah, the first one I actually said, hey, if you're seeing this, it's because we've recently connected on LinkedIn and blah, 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 blah. And then I went into the podcast, again, answering some of the more common questions, the top like 3. And then I said, if you've got other questions, check out this FAQ list that I've linked as well. And your answers will probably be in there. If it's not in there, let me know. And then I'll probably end up adding it to the FAQ list anyway. So yeah, I really streamlined it and was able to book my first like 15 guests just out of that. And then it actually just started snowballing. I didn't have to do it anymore. After the first 15, there was a few more that were trickling in from LinkedIn. But then as I was recording episodes, those guests were then introducing me to other people. Mm-hmm. Then I went through a couple of other channels to find guests. And yeah, just now I don't even have to look for guests. They just come my way, which has been really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I came your way for Pete. No.
Yeah, from Matchmaker, which I love that platform. That's really cool. And now as I'm interviewing more and more people, it's and more content's coming out. Some of the people that were a little bit out of reach, we'll say, mm-hmm. Are now within reach, because I learned one of their measuring criteria is how often, like, how disciplined are you? If you're just starting out, they're going like, well, I don't know if you're going to actually release this, or if you're going to stick with it for longer than 3 months. Well, it'll be mid-June. I'll have finished my recordings for the entire year, 51 episodes. So now that I have other guests who are thinking about it and I've told them that, they're like, oh, well, this guy's got at least a year's worth of content. I'm sure I'll go on your show. I'm like, cool.
So what is your opinion then on delayed posting? Because I think some people have that mentality, like, I want to see this as soon as possible, but then other people don't mind if you wait a bit.
Yeah, so obviously guests have their motivation of why they're going on the podcast, and I've had a couple of them suggest, after I told them when their episode was going to be released, they said, "Oh, well, if you've got that much stocked up, why not release 2 a week?" And I was like, "Hey, that makes sense. Logically, that makes sense. However, I have to then maintain a twice a week frequency in perpetuity, basically, or else I've just reset the standards for the audience that I'm building." So I've stuck to my guns. I'm doing weekly. And for me, the way I look at it is the vast majority of my conversations that I have with guests, and this was by design at the beginning, what are evergreen topics. It doesn't matter when it comes out. It's still going to be a valuable lessons, valuable conversation. There's obviously, with what we're going through right now, and I'm currently dating your podcast, so I'm apologizing, but with like the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the interviews I did over the last like 2 months, we make reference to it.
Yeah.
But we also say, like, during this time that we're going through right now, regardless of when you hear this, this is what we're going through. But the lessons learned are applicable no matter what. It's not like this is the last time we're going to go through some sort of crisis, whether it's global or national, or even just at a municipal level.
Definitely. And I mean, at this point too, I was actually curious because I'm a bit behind on some of my editing because I wanted to post it out over time anyways. I say behind, but it was planned to be that way. And I thought the same thing. Maybe I could do 2 episodes a week, but I didn't think about the perpetualness behind it, perpetuity. I do actually do additional podcasts on top of the interviews. So I had my solo cast still, and I do omni content, which is taking my video, putting it into a podcast the other way around. And so I do that, but that's not necessarily on the schedule like this one is. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Would I like to do daily? I don't know if I would actually want to do daily myself personally, like John Lee Dumas, but there's a reason why he's as successful as he is he's willing to do something that the vast majority of podcast creators are not willing to do. That is a crazy amount of work to put out content on a daily basis.
You could think of it like a campaign though too. You could do it just for 1 year, not for after that.
Oh, for sure. The podcast itself ended up evolving even over. So coming out of it, like at the beginning, it was the intentions were one thing, and then it started evolving, and then now it's evolved into something completely different. So for me, it's the journey itself has been a lot of fun. And just to be honest, one of the lessons learned from guests and books I've read and people that I've become associated with is that do things for yourself. It's not selfish to create your own podcast on your own time frame with your own boundaries. That's not selfish. It's yours.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want with it. Your guests are coming on because you invited them and there's a mutual understanding there.
Yeah.
But don't feel pressure that they can dictate how you're going to run your own podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Because the podcast is eventually going to become a part of a business. So that would be like having a guest or a client dictate how you're going to run your business.
Yeah.
You can take the feedback and consider it, but you're not going to listen to them all the time.
Yeah. Got to filter out the lovers and the haters and this anywhere in between. Speaking of, like, kind of going back to the topic a little bit, your podcast goal is to help coaches reach a more wide-ranging audience. So are you trying to build a community aspect?
Yeah. So there's actually kind of more to it. I should update what my video there that I know you watched, but so helping coaches and entrepreneurs, like mentors, basically reach more people to impact more lives is one big aspect of it. But I want to really create a community of entrepreneurs who are looking for that as well. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of trying to take the two parties, the entrepreneurs, the coaches, and the mentors, and just bring them all into one beautiful community of people who are just looking to help each other out. Right. And that was a big aspect of it going into it. But the more I do it, the more I talk about it, the message gets a little bit more clear. And it's, that's really what it is helping coaches and mentors impact more lives while helping entrepreneurs level up so that they can create the lifestyle that they want. and I'm just kind of the person that brings them together.
Yeah, you're the unifier. Actually, one of my episodes, I was talking with somebody talking about a super connector, someone
Yeah.
who's the networker of all the situation. You know, what's funny is that before PolyInnovator, not to talk about myself too much, but my old brand was called United Living Construct, which is basically a way to make a hub of innovation or people coming together to innovate. And like I started out with the community mentality, and then I boiled down to the podcast and getting the actual work done behind it. So it's kind of like we almost had opposite ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah.
You started
Yeah.
from the ground up, which probably saves you time.
But the best part is that it's evolving, and that's the fun part of all of this. And though the podcast is not really like a source of income really yet, it's still a valuable lesson. I do treat it in quite a like a business in a sense, because it's the beginning of a brand that I'm building.
Yeah. Speaking of brand, I actually want to jump down to actually a different one, is that the branding of your podcast, the blue and yellow color scheme. I've always looked at colors in a very interesting way. And you have that contrasting blue and yellow, which seems like the yellow being the main focus there. What caused you to choose that soft blue and that yellow pages yellow?
Yeah, I like the description, yellow pages yellow. So the blue is my favorite color. So I think that just got naturally worked into it. Yellow was the color I chose first.
Okay.
And the reason I went with yellow was a couple of reasons. If you go to the Get Coached podcast website, so getcoachedpodcast.com, there's an image of me. It's a professional image that was taken like 8 years ago. I might need a bit of an update, but and there's even a bit of a story behind that. But regardless, behind me is a yellow glass, like a yellow tinted glass. And I always thought that was a cool aspect of that picture. Was it's in the background. I don't think it was intentional for the photographer to put it in the background, but there's a lot of really nice contrasting colors, and that yellow window becomes just a nice accent to the entire picture. And so that's it. So obviously, like, that's not the yellow pages yellow there, but I went with yellow because I was thinking this was like the digital marketing side of me. I was thinking, well, as people are scrolling through YouTube or Instagram or Facebook, and they see my thumbnail with that nice bright yellow background, that might catch their attention. And then the blue just was a nice fit for on top of that yellow. And then I went with kind of like blacks and whites and stuff like that. So yeah, it's evolving a little bit. I kind of partnered up with somebody who's helping me out with my Instagram account. So he's a bit of a he's beginning his journey of design and social media management. So I said, well, come work with me and I'll be a case study for you, and I'll coach and mentor you. He's a young guy that I've been mentoring actually for just a little bit over a year. And so I'm helping him reach his goals of whatever he wants. He's helping me out, and we've got a nice little partnership going on right now.
I might have to talk to him because I love design. I love social media marketing. So maybe I'll be able to talk to him about stuff like that too. And
yeah, he loves it. He's diving right into it. And it's cool because he's like, I now have somebody I can kind of like test these ideas with and apply and all this kind of stuff.
I had to do it for myself, and that takes a much more longer iteration, I feel like, than having someone there to give you immediate feedback. Also, too, you talked about the blue being your favorite color. It's interesting how colors end up seeping into that like that. Like my PolyInnovator red was not the first color I chose. My favorite color is green. So the old brand was green, and I moved on to red. But your dynamic of that yellow being that drawing in, just like the PolyInnovator red, attracting the eye. I love it. I knew that question was going to be interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And
no problem.
Hope I didn't distract you with that whole like share screen there. I just thought people.
No, that was cool. I like that.
So taking off another end of the kind of spectrum here, you follow a lot of CEOs I saw on your social medias, like famous creators like John Lee Dumas. And what about those people really get you going? So
a lesson learned from a mentor of mine a few years ago is you want to be associated with or receive influence or receive input. Like you want input. That's the best short word for it. You want to receive input from people that you want to model your own life after. So when it comes to business, there's a lot of those people that I follow on Twitter, John Lee Dumas, Tim Ferriss, Ramit Sethi, like all those types of people that I love the work they've done. I love the brands they've built for themselves. Podcasts, obviously, in particular, John Lee Dumas, Tim Ferriss, Pat Flynn, like I love what they've done. So for me, the reason I follow those people on Twitter is I want to use Twitter in a more productive way, which is, if it's going to be an input for me, it should be controlled and intentional. So let's follow the people that I want to model after, rather than following people where they're whatever the heck they're talking about, that I'm just like, this is, in my mind, it's like, this is trash. But if you keep consuming it, well,
Coming out.
you are what you eat, right? Inputs to outputs. It's, so if you're consuming that kind of garbage, guess what? You're going to output garbage. So that's why I choose the people that I follow. And every once in a while, I actually did it recently, I will purge a little bit and restructure who I'm following depending on where I'm at.
That's good. It's very analytical and trying to make sure you're approaching the right path. I like that.
Yeah.
So you seem to have a lot of influence from mentors throughout your life. What sort of lessons do you think you've learned from them?
The biggest one is just to invest in yourself, to not stop trying to grow and become a better version of yourself. It's a lifelong journey. Yeah. And I only really started 3 years ago as far as being very intentional about it. And the amount of development and growth that I've had in those it's about 3.5 years now, I think, blows my mind, because I've kept a journal throughout that entire time, and I can go back and read and just go, wow, like I'm a completely different person. Just the way I would talk, the way I would think. I had still a bit of a negative mindset around a lot of things, just personal things I needed to work through. And that's only 3.5 years. I've got like 40, 50, 60, who knows how many more years ahead of me. And that actually gets me excited now, because it's like, if I've changed this much in 3.5 years, what am I going to look like in 10 years, in 15, in 20? Exactly. It's just, it blows my mind. And a really good book that's kind of on the subject, but not, is The Compound Effect.
Yeah.
Right.
Good one.
So I had a career in financial planning. So talking about compound rate of return and all that kind of stuff was a very common dialogue I would have with people, as far as the importance of invest early, invest frequently, and let compound rate of returns work for you, basically. It's the same thing when it comes to personal development, personal growth. Read a little bit a day, go do something new, go challenge yourself, go learn, just keep doing it a little bit every day, and it just keeps piling on, and it becomes a compound effect for you.
I love that. And there's actually a term that I created that I think you would love. You're talking about that kind of self-development, that self-progression, and it's called self-edudevment. So taking the idea of education, development, and improvement and putting it all into one self-ecosystem, so to speak. And a lot of people see them as kind of the same thing, but I think if you look at them in separate parts, you can accelerate your growth and try to change your actions based off of those separate tiers, the trifecta. And so education's that foundation. You're learning, you're trying to absorb new information, that sort of thing. Maybe you can say that as a college degree or self-education, even is what I go for. And then you got the improvement. So like you said, that consistent practice, that 1 or 2% every day, compounding, and that really, by the end of the year, that's like 365%, so to speak. And then you finally have that last tier, the development, the self-development, and it almost acts like an exponential effect. And you start developing yourself in a more proactive and, I want to say, analytical manner. Like, what are the things that I can measure? And that could be the catalyst to that growth. So you build on top of each other.
It's similar to the concept of skill stacking, right? Where you go and you learn one skill. I hate when they always say like master it, because if you think about it, like mastering takes a long time to master something, but get get to the point where you're highly proficient is what I would say. So get to that point where you're highly proficient, or at least have a very good understanding, above average. And then if you want to keep going deeper in that and keep excelling, go for it. But eventually you're going to get to a point where your learning curve, it stalls out a little bit, right? So, okay, well, what can you do to kind of get that hockey stick growth curve again in your overall skill set, your overall knowledge? Well, you go find another skill that you're going to learn relatively quickly, because that's the way it works at the beginning. And then again, you get highly proficient in that. But now you've got two of these skill sets that you're highly proficient in that can hopefully anyways complement each other.
Yeah.
And then you've got now a very unique skill set that puts you above the crowd in a different kind of way. And to me, I like that approach, which I think is really kind of, what a polymath is, to be honest. I know that's one of your questions, so I didn't mean to do this, but to me, that's what a polymath is just becoming highly proficient in as many areas as possible. And it just becomes like that compound effect of knowledge and skills. And because you've got such this wide breadth of knowledge and skill sets, it really separates you. And then if you get to a point where you're like, you know what, I've got these, like, I don't know, 5 skill sets that I really enjoy. There's maybe not much else I want to add to the stack. You just keep going deeper on those different 5. Pick one, go deep, pick the other one, go deep. Yeah. To me, that's what a polymath is.
Perfect. You beat me to the punch. I mean, that was kind of where the way you were flowing this conversation, I was like, okay, that's definitely going to be the next question I ask. And you beat me to it. I love it. Well, and I love that question. That's the only question that I have canned, so to speak, that I ask every time. Yeah. And I think it really keeps a consistency between the episodes as well. And it's always interesting to see what people say, even if they've never heard of a polymath before they either sign up for the episode. Like I had someone literally look it up the night before, or look it up the day of even at one point. And it's interesting to see how people's brains concept that idea, because it's not even that novel. It's just a matter of doing multiple skills, but the application and the depth of knowledge, like you were alluding to there, where how much do you want to learn into that area? And I think it's interesting you mentioned the hockey stick. It's almost like a step ladder where you're going up the steps, and getting past that plateau is always really hard. That's why it takes 10,000 hours, as they say, to get past it. So you have to get past that plateau. And I wonder if you get a coach to accelerate that particular plateau. I'm a swim instructor, for example. I know there's a lot of people who hit those plateaus in swimming, and oftentimes it's a simple fix that I see very easily as a coach, but they might not see it. So what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, 100%. Hence why I do the podcast. I if I didn't believe in the value of coaching or mentorship, I would have never started it. But it's a lot of people can be self-taught and get to a, like I said, a high level of proficiency. The downside to being self-taught is you'll pick up bad habits, but you may not recognize it. So I probably have a plenty of bad habits as far as all the different skill sets that I've been trying to acquire and develop over the years. And eventually, like, my ideal situation is that I've got a coach that's helping me with all those different categories. Having a generalized coach, it's the same as having a general physician. It's good to have, as far as like, that's maybe your first point of contact, but that's not the person I'm going to go to for every aspect of my health. I would want to go to a neuroscience if I've got questions about my brain, and somebody who specializes in maybe microbiomes for the gut, and physiotherapist for this, and chiropractor for that, and blah, 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 and all that kind of thing. So to me, that's the ideal situation that really everybody should be striving for, is to have a coach or a mentor who's kind of the different categories of life that you're looking to excel in. You want to have somebody that you can go to. It's very, very difficult for somebody to be able to coach and or mentor you in all aspects of life.
Unless you get like one of those unicorns like Gary Vee or something like that.
Yeah, even in that regard, you got to ask yourself, you look at Gary Vee and you go, does he have the relationship
Mhm.
with his family that I want. I don't know, because he doesn't talk about his family,
Yeah.
but based on what he records and he records everything, you're kind of like, do you ever spend time with your family? For me, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
I Spending time with my family is one of the main reasons why I'm building something, is so that I can design a life where it's like evenings and weekends are
Mhm.
always for the family. In the meantime, there's certain nights of the week that I dedicate to growing the business, the podcast, whatever it is. Same with the weekends. But yeah, having a coach for different categories, I personally think is the better approach,
Yeah.
because again, most people will go really deep in a subject. So go and find that person and learn from them.
And I think I was just gonna say, I think that comes down to the network effect as well. Like the wider your network, you might be able to find more mentors like that too. Someone who could mentor you, even if it's just the next step above, that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
that's a big part of one of the biggest benefits actually of starting the podcast was that,
Mhm.
is building this very wide ranging dynamic network of people who their business and their desire in life and their purpose in life is to help other people excel in that area that they coach. That's been amazing. Like
Yeah.
I'll have soon sat down with 51 different coaches. A lot of them were business coaches,
Yeah.
but even in that regard, they kind of specialized in different areas, or they had different perspectives.
Hmm.
And the amount of knowledge that I've been able to gather over those 51 conversations, it's kind of the same idea I said about 3.5 years of personal growth. Well, 51 conversations, and I'm kind of going like, holy moly, this is crazy. I can't wait for the next 50 and the next 50 after that.
Definitely. It's interesting you say that because I had like 50 episodes by now, but you're the 16th person I've sat down with, and only half of those are uploaded just yet. So it's
Yeah.
definitely interesting that each conversation brings a new picture to the whole big pie, so to speak.
Yeah.
And on the note of Gary Vee, by the way, he did actually, I listened to one of his recent podcasts, and he did talk about family and how he wants to spend time with family. And he actually tries to go out his way to separate work from family. So that's at least a good little note to mention.
Yeah.
What do you think is a good way to accelerate that learning? If you can do it on your own, or besides just coaching in general, how do you level up?
So I've actually had this conversation on the podcast, and it was awesome. So um, what was his name? Lucas Root. And his concept of learning was about like, you want to ingest what you learn. So we kind of walked through that. That's an episode that's going to be coming out. But to summarize, is he had a process basically. So I'm going to probably forget the proper terms here, but I think it's like beta waves,
Mm-hmm.
as far as like when you're in your peak learning state. I believe it's your beta waves
I
are
believe so.
kind of at their highest. And that tends to be first thing in the morning, uh, and when you come out of a deep relaxation. So meditation will kind of trigger that. So what he would do is he would schedule out his day. So he had 3 different sessions: first thing in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening. So in the morning with sleep, and then a short meditative practice. He would then go and consume information. So he was always consuming information during these high beta wave states. So he did that 3 times a day. And then he would set aside other times to almost kind of like recap what he had learned that day by journaling or speaking with somebody, like trying to teach it. And his total time in practice was about just under an hour. And he's like, I've learned so much by doing this. He would actually probably be a really good guest, because
Yeah.
he's very wide range knowledge. um but I was just like, oh, that's super fascinating. So I've just kind of started that process, especially in the morning. Is I'm being very intentional with what I consume in
Mm-hmm.
the morning. I've been really working hard on getting rid of that habit of checking my phone.
Yeah. It's hard.
But I do grab my phone, but it's because I'm either going to listen to an audiobook or a podcast.
Yeah.
And if I don't do that, because I'm either out of audiobooks or there's not really I'm not feeling the podcast thing, I'll grab a book and I'll read. And I think that's one of the values. That's one of the reasons why people say read first thing in the morning without knowing the scientific reasons behind it. Maybe. I don't know.
Well, no, that goes alongside the idea of the circadian rhythm. Everyone's rhythm is different. And so depending on if you're a night owl or early bird, you may have to shift their times a little bit. But it's interesting that you're focusing more on the beta waves, because in all the studies that I've done for it, people focus on the creativity aspect, which is more alpha wave. And so it's almost like input or output. Which ones are you wanting to focus on? If you wanted to focus on the input, you try to maximize the beta wave consumption area times of the day. Or do you want to focus more on the output? So you put your deep work around that creativity phase where you get the alpha wave.
The deep work.
Which,
Cal Newport.
Yeah. And it's I was just going to say one more thing real quick, is that binaural beats often help you get into those states as well.
Oh, okay. Is that like Brain FM? Do you know that one?
I believe that sounds about right. Yeah.
This feels like something I could find for free out there, or it's like a value add to some other service that, because for me, I was just kind of like, do I really want to pay for just sounds for my brain? Sounds good. Yeah, I don't like, for the learning aspect of it, the way I feel like it's an area that I need to become more intentional about, because up until recently it was just more read a minimum 15 minutes a day. I bumped that up actually to 30. And then instead of sitting in silence, which is not a bad thing every once in a while, but if I'm walking around the condo, cleaning up, cooking, and especially if my wife's not around, I'm going to be listening to an audiobook or a podcast, because I have other times dedicated to just kind of sitting in silence. So I don't necessarily have to be in silence too often. Though some would say, and I've actually had a couple guests kind of suggest this, is that you should schedule more silence. And kind of just sit with yourself. Even if you're doing other activities, just let your mind wander and see where it goes sometimes.
Well, it's definitely good for information overload as well. Taking a walk or something like that, and just maybe not silence per se, but nature sounds particularly.
Yeah.
Earlier today, I was waiting for a client, and I was at their house in the back, and I was just sitting in their lawn chair listening to the birds and just the wind going through. And it was the closest thing I had to silence all day. And it's interesting how just I was able to relax and focus on that. And I want to get kind of to one more idea. It's like, what is your audiobook that you've been listening to lately?
It is by Bob Berg. What is it called again? Adversaries into Allies. Win people over without manipulation or coercion.
It kind of reminds me of the Abraham Lincoln quote where he says, I destroy my enemies by making them my friends.
Yeah, it's I've been on a bit of a binge with influence-related books. So there is Bob Berg's book there, two of the books that he co-wrote with the what's the guy's name? So the Go Giver series. So Go Giver is one of my favorite books. It's because it had probably one of the most significant impacts just in my mindset. Then he did Go Giver Influence, Go Giver Leaders. I read Influence by Robert Cialdini recently.
That one sounds familiar,
Some of the audiobooks I listened to just prior to these ones were Robert Greene's Laws of Human Nature, which was an amazing book.
Didn't he write 48 Laws of Power as well?
Yeah, which that one was also really good.
Yeah, that's super helpful, I believe, too.
Robert Greene's books I've listened to most of them. I want to buy the physical copies because I want to actually add them to my library for not just me, but for my son. That's one thing I'm actually doing for him.
Interesting.
But I actually look at his books and I go, I think literally everybody should read Laws of Human Nature.
Okay.
Because at the end of that book, I was just like, wow, we're all messed up.
Yeah.
Like myself included. I've always kind of felt that way about myself. Like I knew I'm not like anything special or perfect, but like the more I read it, I'm just like, holy moly, we are super messed up creatures, highly intelligent, but also like there's so many very primal aspects of our characters and our behavior that have been with us for thousands, if not millions of years.
The reptilian brain and whatnot.
Yeah. And they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So
one thing I will note is that I think Robert Greene's working on a new book. I can't remember what it was about, though. I heard him on a podcast recently, and it seems like a really interesting new book. Obviously, anything he writes is going to be really good, and it's not going to come out for another year or two, but you might look into that.
I should, yeah.
This kind of leads into another question I was going to ask you before we kind of wrap up today, is that why I saw on one of your videos, or no, I think a description was that, why do you say that you have an almost unhealthy habit for learning new things?
So part of the reason I say that is I love learning to the point where I'll put everything else aside just to go and consume more information. And the reason I was very tongue in cheek, obviously, but it gets to the point where I have to remind myself that learning all this stuff is worthless unless I start taking action with it. So I very recently have been really forming that habit of it's great to learn and consume and expand my knowledge, but until I start applying it, I've almost had to reprogram myself that until I've applied it, I've not truly learned it. And my goal is that I want to learn. So it's forcing me to apply more of the stuff that I'm learning or reading about, and or just being very intentional with that knowledge and trying to apply it, because if I don't,
you're going to lose it.
By my own rules, I didn't actually learn it. So it was a waste of time, and I don't like wasting time.
Well, even the neuroscience behind it is that if you don't apply it or like write it down or something like that, you're going to start losing it too. It doesn't submit as well. And
yeah, there's a bunch of diagrams that show that, like, it's your comprehension of things, it drops drastically, which is why they suggest like spaced lessons, so that when you're at a certain point of like 60% retention, you revisit it, but then it jumps it back up. But then the curve down, or the slope down, actually gets flatter and flatter the more frequently you do it, until you get to the point of not full retention, maybe for some people, but a lot more retention. I always feel that you've got it in your brain subconsciously. It's there. It's just being able to pull it on command is what we all mainly struggle with. So
it reminds me of the idea of the muscle memory. So muscle memory is not actually the muscles remembering per se. It's more of the connections between the neurons. There's a thing called the myelin sac around a neuron connection, where it's kind of like a fatty sac that gets thicker the more it gets used. So if you use that particular neuron connection, that connection will start saying like, okay, this is being used a lot. Let's put more resources into that sac, which will help insulate the wire, so to speak, of that connection. And I believe that with that repetition helps build that up.
Yeah, it's whether it actually is the case or not, but where they talk about like the grooves in the brain and how they get deeper and deeper the more you think something, which is why you should intentionally practice more positive thinking, because your default will be negative. But if you keep slipping to that and the grooves get deeper and deeper, that's why it gets harder and harder to pull yourself out of those situations.
One thing that I wish we had time to go on about is a thing called the modular degree, as a framework that I've been creating for PolyInnovators, like the main first phase, the self-education framework that I think you would really like to talk about maybe the next time I have you on or something like that. And then essentially one thing we focus on is repetition, interleaving, which are different concepts of making sure that information is cemented like we were talking about earlier. I think that would be a really interesting discussion that we would have. Do note, PolyCast listeners, that I'll be on the Get Coach podcast next week. We'll be recording at least. We'll probably release down the line. Yeah. But just want to plug that in there before we kind of wrapping up. One of the last questions I have, we might have more time after that though, is what is our call to action for the audience today, do you think?
Yeah, if they want to learn more about what I'm doing and follow the journey, because that's kind of what it is, and learn actionable advice from professional coaches and successful entrepreneurs, I just suggest they go to getcoachpodcast.com, check things out, and there's a way to subscribe and join a mailing list where I have a little bit more of an, we'll call it, intimate relationship with anybody who joins the mailing list, because they're going to get exclusive insight into what I'm doing, what I'm thinking, as well as perhaps some bonus content as it starts coming out.
There you go. And I'll make sure I have all the links in the description too, to make sure that that's all taken care of. Kind of going to back to our original topic about the coaching. What do you think is the ideal coaching situation?
Oh, that's
Kind of wanted to leave there on the brain teaser there.
yeah. I think you know what? I think I'm going to go back to kind of what I said earlier. I think the ideal coaching situation is that you've got a coach that you rely on, that you can rely on, trust, and they can deliver value in each of the aspects of life that you want to be improving on. So health, wealth, and relationships are kind of, we'll say, like the three broad ones. And obviously you can go deeper in that. But if you've got a coach for at least those three different categories, I think you're going to be in a really, really good spot in less than a year, 6 months, I would say, if you had a coach helping you out in each of those three categories.
Interesting. And what do you think makes a good coach to help with those categories?
A good coach is actually somebody who doesn't talk a lot, which is very counterintuitive to what you would think.
Yeah.
What they do is they ask amazing questions and they listen very, very well. They'll talk as when required, but a coach actually helps you figure things out on your own. Because like I said, the majority of the people who want to work with coaches are people like ourselves that want to improve, like your audience, my audience. They want to improve, they want to get better. Well, that kind of person is already going out there and collecting all this great input. A coach is just kind of helping you figure it out on your own, right?
Yeah.
They'll remove the little obstacles and the roadblocks from time to time if you're really struggling, but for the most part, they ask great questions and they really listen to what you're saying and will guide you a little bit towards where you're thinking. Guide's sometimes not even the right word, because guide means sometimes to like lead, and they're not really leading you. They're, what is a better way of saying it? Guide's the only word I can really think of right now, but they're not telling you where to go. Like they're just helping you get to the answer that you need to find out for yourself.
Showing you how to get to the why or something.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. That's why guide is still like, it's a relevant word,
Yeah.
but I think a lot of people would take guide out of context as far as like, here, I'm going to guide you. And I literally like walk you step by step along this path. There's some types of coaches and mentors can and will do that for you. But I think the better ones will let you go through the struggle a little bit, because going through those struggles is where you learn, but they're there to kind of support you along that journey.
It's interesting you say that, because as a swim coach, I don't know if it's because it's more physical versus metaphysical or in a way, but I'll guide people through steps. Someone's actually referred to me as like a stock reel of information, where I'll just spew it out. And then I also know exactly what you're talking about, though, where I let them feel the situation for themselves. So, for example, the pressure of not being able to breathe. There are certain things I can do to kind of coerce that to happen. And then I'll show them why a particular movement is not good because of that feeling that you get. And I don't necessarily tell them that until after, or if they're kids, I won't tell them at all. Something like that. Sometimes it depends. But yeah, it's interesting how you're mentioning it like that. And it made me think about how I could be a better coach.
There's certain technical aspects that it's maybe show or guide them a little bit, but I think a lot of the times, especially if you're a little bit of we'll call it a high performer. So this is, I would say, almost more relevant to high performers. High performers probably already know the answer or can figure it out on their own, but they just need that person to kind of like, to it's almost like that dialogue is what helps them. It extracts that out of them. There's a good word, extract. Yeah. That a good coach helps you extract the information.
I was watching a podcast earlier about it was Russell Brand, and I don't remember who the guest was at this particular point, but he was explaining the ideas that he's wanting to talk about, and the guest was a psychologist, and he was able to distill the fact that Russell Brand's a very visual person. He was giving all these different images, all these different areas that he's trying to describe. That's what I'm trying to do with my hands even too, if you're watching the Innovator video. But the psychologist was even examining him and saying that he didn't have the right path between those images. He was giving out the ideas, but the coach was able to dissect the fact that there was a particular path, and a
Mm,
coach helps you find that path between the different areas. Even if you
yeah.
know the areas, you don't know how to really go through it.
Yeah. It's just having that other outside perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Polycast. I'm very grateful to have you here. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. I know I did.
Thanks, Dustin. It was a pleasure.
All right.